Hello, Ruja, pals. Hello, Carrie. How are you, Carrie? I recognize that name. That's so nice. Thanks for joining me. And I'm live now on all of the places. So that means Instagram, Facebook, um, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So my name is Crispina French, and I am a textile upcycling entrepreneur, activist, Pacho, Pacho, podcast host, and I also host a summit, and I'm a business coach, and I also have a thing called Stitcherhood, which if you're Carrie Chabot, you know all about that because it is a community right here online for textile upcycling entrepreneurs who want to kind of up level their game, right? And like make a little bit more money and maybe have a better kind of work life experience, right? With just making enough money to make it all worthwhile. So, if you're interested in any of those things, you can go to my website or you can type stuff up in the chat and any questions you might have. Hey, Anita, thanks for joining today. So if you're joining me for this live session live, let me know where you're tuning in from, where you're, how you found out about this session, and just let me thank you before I even get started for being here with me. So I would like to teach you guys, well, first of all, these sessions are 20 minutes long every Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I am teaching textile upcycling, which just means to me that, just think of ways that you can really use the textiles in your life longer, or how you can recreate new things from old things. So I got started in this arena back in the 1980s when I was a college kid, and I've been doing it ever since. And I really just really love it. So I'm excited to encourage you to take it up a notch if you're interested, and just learn how you can do this at home if it's just something more of like a hobby. So today I'm going to teach you guys the basket stitch, and the basket stitch is a way of mending holes. So I'm just going to hold this piece up to the camera really closely. So there you can see that there's a hole right by my finger. Okay, so this is a hole right here. And this is a blanket square that I use to make the blankets that I sell. And it's made out of recycled sweaters. And a lot of times people donate their sweaters when they're either shrunk or they have holes in them. So when I'm working, and this is just a kind of nice little side note for anybody who is making product with used clothing to sell, I mark the holes with a safety pin so that later when I want to come back, I don't have to stop and like fix a hole every time I run across it when I'm doing the different steps in my process, but I know right where to find them when I'm ready to do that step. So I took the safety pin out and I've pressed the square nice and flat, and now we're going to do a basket stitch. So for ease of viewing on camera, I am going to find a color of yarn that is a contrast. So we're going to use this piece of pink yarn, and we're going to stitch that hole up. And this is a great stitch for mending socks. If you have single socks you want to mend, and I don't know about you, but I know that I really like nice socks. So they cost a lot of money. This is a darning egg. And you put this, you can find these like tag sales and whatever, and you put this right inside your sock, and then you can sort of sew against it when you're mending. But we're going to work on a flat surface so you can really see it from both sides. Okay, so we're going to start by threading the needle. This is a nice big kind of fat sewing needle. It's got yarn threaded through it, and this yarn is called Persian wool. And the thing I love about Persian wool is that, first of all, it comes in a lot of beautiful colors, and it also has sort of like embroidery floss. It has multiple ends. So there's 3 ends, and it's generally used, I think it's generally used for like needlepoint or something. I'm not a needle pointer, but you can use it for, so it's a nice kind of a strong wool yarn, and you can use it for sewing. My biggest issue with Persian wool yarn, which is, if you're just joining us, what we're talking about, it's hard to find. You can find it for like I said, I think it's needlepoint. People use it a lot. If anybody knows, type it up. Are you a needle pointer? Do you use Persian wool yarn in your process? I used to buy it in big volume from a company up in Maine, Saco River Dye House, I believe it's called. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But at any rate, it's SCACCO, I believe, Saco River. They're up in Maine, and they bought a company that was existing that I purchased from before they were in existence, and they bought it and sort of amped it up a notch. So hopefully they're still doing really well up there with that, and you can find it there. Anyway, okay, threaded needle. We got a hole right here. We're going to do a basket stitch. And so I'm going to come from behind. I'm going to come in to the front from the back with my needle and pull it through. And I have to just give you a little piece of advice here. When you're stitching by hand, don't use a giant long piece of yarn. You don't really need a giant long piece of yarn, and it just gets tangled and in the way, especially when you're teaching. Okay. All right, so we're going to just make these long stitches, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to take a couple stitches, and then I'm going to hold my work up so you can see it. Basically, what we're doing is we're laying down the warp. So we're going to weave this. It's called the basket stitch. So baskets are woven, and some people call it the basket weave. I think I've called it both. It's in my book. If anybody has my book, that's called The Sweater Chop Shop that I wrote. It's actually out of print right now, you guys. I don't know. I'm trying to decide. Should I just republish it as is, or take the time it would take to update? I think I need to update. It's out of date a little bit because the Sweater Chop Shop's written all about wool sweaters, and there's really not that much wool in the thrift stream these days. Okay, so do you see my stitches? They're going right across the hole. So like the holes underneath those stitches, and they're kind of long. They're probably 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches long, and they're front and back. So this is the technique I use for mending my blankets. And, blankets are useful front and back. So you want to make it look nice on both sides, right? So then we're going to take the back side of the needle. So like the blunt end, the end with the eye. And we're going to just kind of carefully weave that under, over, across the patch, right? The warp threads that you put down with your first stitches. And then we're going to just stitch toward the back of the square, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing on the back side. So you're going to weave across on the back. And then you're going to poke your needle through to what is actually the right side of the blanket, or soon to be blanket, and pull that through. So you're kind of like making like a front and back at the same time. Is that making sense? If anybody has questions, pop them up in the chat, so that I can make sure to address them. Because if you have questions, I'm sure other people do too. I love the Sweater Chop Shop. Sue Grizel, thank you for chiming in. Found it when I was new to upcycling textiles. You've been a mentor to me through it. Ah, thanks. I'm so glad. I'm so happy. I love to inspire people to use this process, because I'll tell you something. Upcycling textiles is super fun, right? Can you attest to that, Sue? Are you having fun with it? Right? Like, you get to go to the thrift store. There's a treasure hunt involved. Sorry, got to go treasure hunt. It's my job. And then you get to, outfit yourself in the process. She says, yes, all caps. Hey, Susie Kane. Okay, cool. So now we got 2 rows. Can you see them? You don't want to pack them down too close together, because one of the things that happens when you do that is you wind up with this kind of bulbous, fat, thick bit on your blanket or your sweater, whatever you're mending. And it just kind of, I don't know, it just calls attention to it. It doesn't lay down nice and flat. So I'm going to keep going. Usually when I make these basket weave stitches, they're patches really to cover a blemish or a hole in the fabric. I usually do them even. So if I have 4 kind of warp stitches that I've put down, I go back and I'll do 4 weft. So there's warp and weft, if anybody's familiar with the terms used when you're weaving on a loom. And the first stitches you put down, or the threads that are on that loom, are called the warp. And then when you go across that warp, it's called the weft. So you're learning all kinds of things today, people. Am I right? Okay, so then we're going to keep on going. I'm almost done here. I'm just going to show you this in a second, so you can get the full-on visual for how it comes out, which I think is super cool. All right, so here's the front of the square. So can you see the little woven bit here? The pink part is, there was a hole there, and we just covered it with that sort of simple little stitch. It's really not hard. It does take a little bit of practice so that you're not like pulling too tight or letting it be too loose. Sue says, why do we use the blunt end of the needle for the weave stitch? The reason I weave through the warp with a blunt end is so that I don't split the yarn. I'm not going through the yarn, but I'm actually going under or over the yarn. It's easier to kind of find a path with the blunt end than the pointy end. So somebody says they love treasure hunting. Of course you do, because it's so much fun, right? No, and Naledi Fabrics, and I think that her name is Anita. Am I right, Anita? I think she introduced herself earlier. Yeah, she says, hi, Anita here. So yeah, Anita, yes, it's really fun. So then this is the front of the square, right? Now the back of the square looks very similar, except for we have the starting knot right here, right there. And then we're gonna have this end knot. And I'll teach you a little something which most people think is not actually going to work. But what I do when I want to end something, especially on a basket stitch like this, where the string is not, it's not going to pull out because it's a patch, right? So I just actually stick the tail end of the yarn kind of between the patch and the back side of the fabric. So that it gets kind of tucked in there without making a second lumpy knot. You know, again, this is a blanket, and it's nice to have it just be nice and as smooth and kind of, I don't know, soft and non-bumpy as possible. So then I'm just going to snip that off. And I see a couple of questions popped up on the comments. So there's the back, there's the front. Now, one thing you guys cannot see from where you are on my Zoom, and let me see. Well, it's really hard, but oh, let me show you this. I have this awesome iron, okay? This is one of my 10 favorite tools, which I actually have a little download on my website that I'll make it easier to find. It's not that easy to find right now, but this is called the gravity feed iron. And if you work with recycled textiles of any kind, especially like knits, this is your friend. It's got what's called a Teflon shoe on it that fastens with this sort of spring right here. The shoe part comes off. It's hot right now, so I can't take it off. But I'm going to press that patch that we just made with this has a lot of steam that comes out. So there's a button here that creates a steam flow when you hit it. And then when you are finished pressing it, you really have this beautiful, flat, nice little color addition, you know, a visibly mended piece that is, you know, just shows that it was handmade, right, with love. So that is the basket stitch. Okay, and great for patching. And like I said earlier, if you're just tuning in, you might not have heard me say that this is also a really good stitch that you can use for socks if you're darning socks. And one thing I will say is that you don't have to do it on two sides. Like instead of going around to the back to make the patch front and back, like for instance, if you were doing this on a sock, you would just make a long stitch and then take a tiny little stitch and go back the other way so that all of your stitching is actually on the outside of the sock and you can see it and you don't have to flip it back and forth. And you can use any kind of material. You always want to kind of match the weight of the sewing material. This being yarn kind of matches the weight of the sort of thick and felty sweater bit. So if you're darning socks, you might want to use like a really thin, you know, even you could use an embroidery floss, or you could use like a sewing machine thread or something that's as thin as the sock is. So you're not creating this like big, thick bump that's going to become uncomfortable in your shoes. All right. So Carrie says, so cute. I want to grab a holy sweater real quick, right? I know it's fun. And it's really fun now that, you know, visible mending's all the rage. So if you have a sweater with holes in it, you can do this cute little fun technique and still get a lot of wear out of it. And you know, one thing I want to say is sometimes, and like, you know, if you are someone who is self-conscious about people looking at your torso and you have holes that are like, you know, boob height or whatever, rather than having like a patch right on your boob where you're going to be like, oh my gosh, everybody's staring at me, I don't want that attention there, you can put additional patches other places to kind of draw your eye away, so that, maybe they're patching places that aren't really holy, but it'll just kind of create more of a design element than actually just patching the places where there are holes if they're kind of in inopportune locations on your garment. Just a rule of thumb. All right, so let's see. I have a couple questions I'm going to run down here. Why do we use the blunt end of the needle? So Sue asked that question, and I went over that. That's just so you don't kind of splice through the yarn. Does it matter if there is an even or odd number of stitches to start? Asks Catherine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. Whatever. I just really kind of look at the size of the hole that I want to cover, and whatever number of stitches makes sense to cover that. A couple of rules of thumb is that beginners oftentimes will put their stitches too close together, and then they're hard to weave through. And when you do weave through, it creates that bumpy thing that we just talked about. So you want to kind of give yourself a little bit of space so that when you go to weave across them, that you're kind of creating a flat plane and not a big bump. Hi, Crispina. As always, beautiful work, says a LinkedIn user. And I'm not sure who that is because I can't see your name, but hello, whoever you are from LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in. Jeff and Jody, who is actually my girlfriend Jody, who's over in Stitcherhood with us, says she is going to spend her afternoon doing some fun stitching. This is it's a very relaxing, cool process, you guys. There's a couple of, and I just want to kind of say, if you have a very large hole that you're working to cover, it can be really hard to do with this technique, especially as a beginner, just because it gets a little, like if the tension on your initial stitches if the tension's not even across all your stitches, it can just be a little tricky. So don't try to do anything crazy the first couple times you try this. And like I said, you want to match your stitching thread, yarn, or whatever you're using to kind of the weight of the fabric that you're mending. So the heavyweight yarn that I used on this felted heavyweight piece of fabric is a perfect match, whereas something thinner, you're going to use a little, a thinner stitching medium, if you will. Same thing goes for your needles. If you are new to hand sewing, or maybe you're just coming back to it after being away from it for a while, the needle makes a hole through your fabric. And the needle needs to pull your yarn or thread, whatever you're stitching with, along with it. So when you pull your yarn or your thread away from your needle, like I am now, you want the circumference of the needle and the circumference of your stitching material to be similar. If you've jammed a really fat piece of string through a really thin needle and it was really hard to do and it's hard to pull it through, it's not the right match, and it's going to be really hard to sew with. So one of the things I hear often from people is that people get frustrated with sewing. And sometimes it's just because of silly little things like that, that if you know why to choose a different option, sometimes you will, right? And then before you get frustrated. So I think I got all the questions. If there's any other questions, if you're listening to this as a recording and you run into a question, just pop it right into the comments and I will look back to it and answer it for you. And otherwise, if you got a lot out of this session this afternoon, please tell your friends. This is a free thing I do every Tuesday. We talk about textile upcycling, really paying attention to how we can use the textiles that we have in our lives for a longer period of time, or to upcycle them into something that's new and maybe more valuable than it is to start with. So if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, if you've seen my work and you have questions about how I've done any particular technique, please either just leave a comment in the chat, or you can reach out to me on email. I have a contact form on my website at crispina.eco. And there's all sorts of other cool and fun information over there too, if that's of interest. And you can also hop on an email list if you'd like to get a reminder for these sessions, so that you are reminded on your email, hey, it's going to start in just a couple of minutes. So is there anybody here who got a reminder from me just a little bit ago? Anybody? Let me know if you did that, because it's kind of fun to send those cool little things out. And I always try to make the emails kind of eye candy-ish too. So, it's not just another wordy document in your inbox. Anyways, you guys, thanks so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure. And I'll see you next week, same time, same station. Have a great one.